Hello to all watching. My name is Treymont Levy, and I'm a psych major at UBC. A little background on myself. I'm 23 years old, born and raised here in Vancouver, and a huge believer of health and fitness. With that being said, I've chosen to study psychology from a belief its correlations to all work or career chosen and benefits to all overall understanding human behavior. To me, it is very important and beneficial to understand not only how or what, but why humans behave the way they do. Previous research in 2007 by Meltzoff addressed the limited understanding of social cognition within infants. In fact, in his article, he argues that infants have an innate interpretive framework which is responsible for perceiving and comparing critical cues of the social environment to themselves. This idea of comparing and making decisions based off of similarities is also expanded in an article called The Consequences of Minimal Group Affiliations in Children, in which they ran studies that displayed children implicitly decide to associate with those who are perceived as similar to them, in which children displayed the tendency to allocate further resources to other children based off of their individual color group, red or blue, even though there was no association prior to the actual color that was given to them at random assignment. Now, previous understanding by work done in the early 2000s was the idea that having this such in-group and out-group biases was a cultural schema which was later developed in life once there's groundwork and understanding of such differences. However, recent research in the example provided a second ago has actually shown otherwise. Continuing on the article by Meltzoff, he argues the function of this innate interpretive framework is for detecting perceived similarities and comparisons themselves, which also functions as a foundation for such in-group and out-group biases. In the study, Meltzoff actually analyzes how infants 12, 14, and 18 months old imitate and mimic the direction of an agent who turns their head and focuses on a distal object. What he found was that infants were less likely to follow the gaze of the agent when the agent themselves were blindfolded. The interesting thing was that the infants of younger age would still follow the gaze even if the agent was blindfolded until after they actually underwent blindfold training and actually began to understand that the agent does not have visual access, the function of the blindfold itself, and therefore that the agent experiences similar, keyword similar, block or loss of access to visual sight. And now, even though that exact mechanism for such interpretive framework is not known at this point, I still remain interested, for I believe there's a relation between such mechanism and the susceptibility of drawing similarities as infants age and develop. Another study done by Ted Schwabe investigated the lifespan of aging and development and its correlations to openness over a 7-year period of self-reported acts. Now, studying a population, age group ranging from 13 to 85 years of age, him and his team found evidence that displayed openness with regards to experience and openness to culture, in fact, declines with age. Now, these studies were findings were a source of motivation for my study, for it seems to be a connection between his research on openness and the function of such interpretive framework, as described in Meltzoff's, within an infant, which is responsible for gauging such similarities during development. For example, perhaps during one's development, potentially they are less likely to experience the feeling of association or bias towards another agent due to the potential decline in openness of detecting similarities within that other agent. This idea of an innate interpretive framework is further supported by work done by Stefano Vininci and Yuna Zhang, who studied a population age ranging from 0 to 2 months, which is 10 months earlier than the infant studied in Meltzoff, like me study. They argue for an association by similarity theory, which is similar but different to the one proposed by Meltzoff, for it does not require infants to be able to recognize similarities in others in reference to themselves, but simply perceiving similarities by association alone. This potentially would mean that in-group and out-group biases may stem off association alone and not necessarily requiring similar physiological properties such as height, weight, hair, or skin color. Now, another article by Buttleman and Bohm argued that the importance of research surrounding the development of what they describe as in-group love and out-group discrimination is important for its consequences of hatred, contempt towards that out-group, or on the other side, such as loyalty and cohesion towards that in-group. Their study included 45 children, mean age of 6, and they were able to display that in-group biases or in-group love develop within an infant actually prior to that development of out-group discrimination. Such evidence that the two don't emerge simultaneously only further supports work done by Meltzoff and his theory of this innate interpretive framework being based off of similarities to themselves. And such that similarities are detected first, this would then make sense for the in-group love to develop first, and the discrimination of out-group differences and discrimination being left to follow second. Another study that ties into the common theme of development of social cognition in infants was work done by Rachel Bedford, who investigates the role of emotional recognition and its correlation with callousness, which is distinguished as a persistent pattern of behavior that reflects a disregard for others and also a lack of empathy and general deficient affect. Previous studies have been able to display evidence suggesting that there is indeed an innate interpretive framework, an underlying mechanism responsible for gauging similarities and hypothetically leading to the production of in-group and out-group biases. However, there is a lack of research with regards to the susceptibility, the openness of this innate mechanism with regards to agents, specifically those who lack similar physiological properties. In other words, I aim to explore whether there is a change in the susceptibility of this innate mechanism over age, which therefore leads to finding less similarities amongst other agents in the environment, which is hypothetically considered the foundation of such biases. For example, when a child is born, is that underlying mechanism considered more susceptible to detecting such similarities, and how does this change with age? This research would aid us in the understanding of an infant's interpretive framework, which was hypothesized by work done by Meltzoff, and how it interacts with salient cues of the similarities of other agents in their environment, and further explore what relation does this function have to do with openness and in-group and out-group biases. My hypothesis is that an infant's susceptibility for detecting similarities in agents of their environment declines with age. Therefore, from my research thus far, I would expect that an infant 12 months of age would be more likely to draw further similarities between themselves and the agents of differing physiological properties in comparison to another infant at 18 months of age. As far as participants go, there will be 3 groups of 30 infants, each group containing equal amount of boys and girls. Now I would aim for group 1 to have 12 months of age infants, group 2, 14 months, and group 3, 18-month-old agents. Now children, or infants, would be recruited from a general population with an aim to be able to select a diverse mix of infants with regards to race, ethnicity, and social class. Parental consent would be obtained prior to the study, and as far as compensation goes, each parent will be receiving $20 to reimburse their traveling costs and their time. As for procedures, each infant will be individually placed in a room. Will they be presented at random assignment, one of 3 of our independent variables, or one of 3 of our puppets. Now, puppet A will be your typical puppet, which has arms and a face, nose, mouth, eyes and ears, the one that most likely and closely resembles facial features of a human agent. Puppet B will have only partial human features, only mouth and eyes, while puppet C will just be a plain sock. Act as a baseline to ensure that infants are indeed paying additional attention to puppets for their physiological properties versus simply paying attention to such stimulation. Once an infant is placed in the room, they will be subject to a series of movements from the puppet. Each puppet will move at identical speed and pace to control for potentially overstimulating or understimulating motions that may skew and attract additional attention from an infant. Each infant will only be subject to 60 seconds of such motion, as we want to avoid fatigue and avoid complete loss of interest. Now, of the 60 seconds, we will be specifically measuring the total number of time spent from an infant focusing on the puppet, as well as the frequency of interrupted observations. In other words, how many times did an infant break visual contact? This will allow us to cross-reference the scores of other infants of other age groups and compare to see whether our hypothesis is true or not. Granted that my hypothesis is correct, the results I expect to find is a decreasing trend in the attention-focused puppets that less resemble a human agent, example puppets B or C, as the test group population age increases. For example, those infants of 12 months of age, I would expect to spend time implicitly gazing at puppets A, B, or C to be more similar, their scores more similar in comparison to the infants of 18 months, where I expect a wider range and a more precise time spent on those puppets with further physiological similarities. These proposed results that I hope for would tie in and support the work done previously by Meltzoff, who believes the preference shown here would be a result of the infant's ability to show preference to the agent with further physiological similarities as opposed to those agents who have less similarities or none at all. Therefore, I am aiming for unbiased results that display a decline in the infant's innate interpretive framework for identifying and detecting such similarities and a decline in such susceptibility. Based on previous evidence that similarities are a starting point, a foundation for in-group and out-group biases, I'm curious to wonder if this interpretive framework for identifying similarities in agents, which I hypothesize to reduce with age, may potentially be linked to levels of openness throughout development. I would also like to further research the potential pros and cons of in-group and out-group biases with regards to agents who lack human identity, but may potentially look human to the naked eye. And what about our other senses? For example, skin contact, smell, voice. What also interests me is the introduction of AI agents among similar studies and the measurement of similar tendencies amongst infants for the fact that AIs that assist us and aid us are gradually becoming more evident and apparent in our everyday lives. Now, assuming my proposed results are true, there are still implications present. One implication being that it would be very difficult to select the desired number of infants with the specific age group, which is important to, of course, control for. Another implication is difficulty of infants of actually interpreting infants' actions. In other words, is visual gaze alone and focus alone to the agent sufficient enough to conclude that an infant is indeed detecting similarities? This is an assumption, of course, that has been made for the sake of the study, for the fact that infants are unable to explicitly report their intentions. Now, another implication comes to mind is the connection between similarities and openness is kept pretty vague. Openness to what exactly? Example, openness to social situations, openness to activities, simply trying new things. There are many factors that openness actually relies on. However, it has been kept open for simplistic reasons of this study. Now, even though recent research also tends to show a general decline in openness, other research has been found to actually display the exact opposite. However, I would love to see research specifically between openness in terms of being socially unbiased and similarities where biases are suggested to have stemmed from. With that being said, thank you for tuning in. I hope this presentation has been intriguing and more importantly, informative. Thank you very much and have a good day.